In this video, we'll be looking at the unified kill chain, which is another framework for understanding how attacks are executed from malicious actors. I will be going through the unified kill chain room from TryHackMe. So let's get started. The unified kill chain is a framework which establishes the phases of an attack and a means of identifying and mitigating risks to IT assets. Introduction. Understanding the behaviors, objectives, and methodologies of a cyber threat is a vital step to establishing a strong cybersecurity defense, known as cybersecurity posture. In this room, you'll be introduced to the UKC, Unified Kill Chain framework that is used to help understand how cyber attacks occur. Learning objectives. Understanding why frameworks such as the UKC are important and helpful in establishing good cybersecurity posture. Using the UKC to understand an attacker's motivations, methodologies, and tactics. Understanding the various phases of the UKC. Discover that the UKC is a framework that is used to complement other frameworks such as MITRE. Let's go. What is a kill chain? Originating from the military, a kill chain is a term used to explain the various stages of an attack. In the realm of cybersecurity, a kill chain is used to describe the methodology/path attackers such as hackers or APTs use to approach and intrude a target. For example, an attacker scanning, exploiting a web vulnerability, and escalating privileges will be a kill chain. We will come to explain these stages in much further detail later in this room. The objective is to understand an attacker's kill chain so that defensive measures can be put in place to either preemptively protect a system or disrupt an attacker's attempt. Where does the term kill chain originate from? The military. What is threat modeling? Threat modeling in a cybersecurity context is a series of steps to ultimately improve the security of a system. Threat modeling is about identifying risk and essentially boils down to identifying what systems and applications need to be secured and what function they serve in the environment. For example, is a system critical to normal operations? And is a system holding sensitive information like payment info or addresses? Number 2, assessing what vulnerabilities and weaknesses these systems and applications may have and how they could be potentially exploited. Number 3, creating a plan of action to secure these systems and applications from the vulnerabilities highlighted. Number 4, putting in policies to prevent these vulnerabilities from occurring again where possible. For example, implementing a software development lifecycle, SDLC, for an application or training employees on phishing awareness. Threat modeling is an important procedure in reducing the risk within a system or application, as it creates a high-level overview of an organization's IT assets. An asset in IT is a piece of software or hardware, and the procedures to resolve vulnerabilities. The UKC can encourage threat modeling as the UKC framework helps identify potential attack surfaces and how these systems may be exploited. STRIDE, DREAD, and CVSS, to name a few, are all frameworks specifically used in threat modeling. If you are interested to learn more about check out the Principles of Security room on TryHack. What is the technical term for a piece of software or hardware in IT? That is an asset. Nope, need to type it in. Introducing the unified kill chain. To continue from the previous task, the unified kill chain, published in 2017, aims to complement, not compete with, other cybersecurity kill chain frameworks such as Lockheed Martin and MITRE attacks. The UKC states that there are 18 phases to an attack. That is a lot. Everything from reconnaissance to data exfiltration and understanding an attacker's motive. These phases have been grouped together in this room into a few areas of focus for brevity, which will be detailed in the remaining tasks. Some larger benefits of the UKC over traditional cybersecurity kill chain frameworks include the fact that it is modern and extremely detailed. Reminder, it has 18 phases officially, whereas other frameworks have a small handful. Let's read through the phases. Phase 1, reconnaissance. Researching, identifying, and selecting targets using active and passive reconnaissance. Phase 2, weaponization. Preparatory preparatory activities aimed at setting up the infrastructure required for the attack. Stage 3 is delivery, techniques resulting in the transition of a weaponized object to the targeted environment. Step 4, social engineering, techniques aimed at manipulation of people to perform unsafe actions. Step 5, exploitation, techniques to exploit vulnerabilities in systems that may, amongst others, result in code execution. Step 6, persistence, any access, action, or change to a system that gives an attacker persistent presence on the system. Phase 7, defense evasion, techniques an attacker may specifically use for evading detection or avoiding other defenses. Command and control, techniques that allow attackers to communicate with controlled systems within a targeted network. Phase 9, pivoting, tunneling traffic through a controlled system to other systems that are not directly accessible. Phase 10, discovery, techniques that allow an attacker to gain knowledge about a system and its network environment. Phase 11, privilege escalation, the result of techniques that provide an attacker with higher permissions on a system or network. Phase 12, execution, techniques that result in execution of an attacker-controlled code on a local or remote system. Phase 13, credential access, techniques resulting in the access or control over system, service, or domain credentials. Phase 14, lateral movement, techniques that enable an adversary to horizontally access and control other remote systems. 15 is collection, techniques used to identify and gather data from a target network prior to exfiltration. 16, exfiltration, techniques that result or aid in an attacker removing data from a target network. Phase 17 is impact, techniques aimed at manipulating, interrupting, or destroying the target system or data. Phase 18, objectives, socio-technical objectives of an attack that are intended to achieve a strategic goal. That was a lot. Benefits of the Unified Kill Chain Framework. It's modern. The UKC is extremely detailed. It covers an entire attack from reconnaissance, exploitation, post-exploitation, and includes identifying an attacker's motivation, which is clearly seen in phase 18, which is like the intention of the attacker, what they wanted to achieve with all of that work. The UKC highlights a much more realistic attack scenario. Various stages will often reoccur. For example, after exploiting a machine, an attacker will begin reconnaissance to pivot to another machine. How do other frameworks compare? Some frameworks, such as MITRE's, were released in 2013 when the cybersecurity landscape was very different. Other frameworks often have a small handful of phases. Other frameworks cover a limited amount of phases. That just means the same thing. Other frameworks do not account for the fact that an attacker will go back and forth between the various phases during an attack. What year was the UKC framework released? That was 2017. According to the UKC, how many phases are there in an attack? That's 18. What is the name of the attack phase where an attacker employs techniques to evade detection? That is defense evasion. What is the name of the attack phase where an attacker employs techniques to remove data from a network? Exfiltration. What is the name of the attack phase where an attacker achieves their objectives? That's like objectives? Yeah. Initial foothold, with a lovely picture of a foot. The main focus of this series of phases is for an attacker to gain access to a system or networked environment. An attacker will employ numerous tactics to investigate the system for potential vulnerabilities that can be exploited to gain a foothold in the system. For example, a common tactic is the use of reconnaissance against a system to discover potential attack vectors, such as applications and services. This series of phases also accommodates for an attacker creating a form of persistence, such as files or a process that allows the attacker to connect to the machine at any time. Finally, the UKC accounts for the fact that attackers will often use a combination of tactics listed above. We'll explore the different phases of this section of the UKC in the headings below. Reconnaissance. So they've helpfully placed the MITRE tactic next to the different phases. So the first one, reconnaissance. This phase of the UKC describes techniques that an adversary employs to gather information relating to their target. This can be achieved through means of passive and active reconnaissance. The information gathered during this phase is used all throughout the later stages of the UKC, such as the initial foothold. Information gathered from this phase can include discovering what systems and services are running on the target. This is beneficial information in the weaponization of exploitation and phases of this section. Finding contact lists and lists of employees that can be impersonated or used in either a social engineering or phishing attack. Looking for potential credentials that may be of use in later stages, such as pivoting or initial access. Understanding the network topology and other networked systems can be used to pivot to weaponization. This phase of the UKC describes the adversary setting up the necessary infrastructure to perform the attack. For example, this could be setting up a command and control server or a system capable of catching reverse shells and delivering payloads to the system. Social engineering. This phase of the UKC describes techniques that an adversary can employ to manipulate employees to perform actions that will aid in the adversary's attack. For example, a social engineering attack could include getting a user to open a malicious attachment, impersonating a web page and having the user enter the credentials, calling or visiting the target and impersonating a user. For example, requesting a password reset, or being able to gain access to areas of a site that the attacker would not previously be capable of. For example, impersonating a utility engineer. Exploitation. This phrase of the UKC describes how an attacker takes advantage of weaknesses or vulnerabilities present in a system. The UKC defines exploitation as abuse of vulnerabilities to perform code execution. For example, uploading and executing a reverse shell to a web application, interfering with an automated script on the system to execute code, abusing a web application vulnerability to execute code on the system it is running on. Persistence. This phase of the UKC is rather short and simple. Specifically, this phase of the UKC describes the techniques an adversary uses to maintain access to a system they have gained an initial foothold on. For example, creating a service on the target system that will allow the attacker to regain access, adding the target system to a command and control server where commands can be executed remotely at any time, leaving other forms of backdoors that execute when a certain action occurs on the system. A reverse shell will execute when a system administrator logs in. And from the perspective of an attacker, persistence is probably one of the most important post-exploitation techniques that need to be followed up. Once you've gained access, establishing persistency should be the next step. Defense evasion. The defense evasion section of the UKC is one of the more valuable phases of the UKC. This phase specifically is used to understand the techniques an adversary uses to evade defensive measures to put in place in the system or network. For example, this could be web application firewalls, network firewalls, antivirus systems on the target machine, intrusion detection systems. This phase is valuable when analyzing an attack as it helps form a response and, better yet, gives the defensive team information on how they can improve their defense systems in the future. Command and control. The command and control phase of the UKC combines the efforts an adversary made during the weaponization stage of the UKC to establish communications between the adversary and target system. An adversary can establish command and control of a target system to achieve its actions on objectives. For example, the adversary can execute commands, steal data, credentials, and other information, use the controlled server to pivot to other systems on the network. And finally, pivoting. Pivoting is the technique an adversary uses to reach other systems within a network that are not otherwise accessible. For example, they are not exposed to the internet. There are often many systems in a network that are not directly reachable and often contain valuable data and have weaker security. For example, an adversary can gain access to a web server that is publicly accessible to attack other systems that are within the same network, but are not accessible via the internet. What is an example of a tactic to gain a foothold using emails? That's phishing. Impersonating an employee to request a password reset is a form of social engineering. An adversary setting up the command and control server infrastructure is what phase of the unified kill chain? Command and control. Or weaponization. Weaponization. It's weaponization. Exploiting a vulnerability present on a system is what phase? Exploitation. Moving from one system to another is an example of pivoting. Leaving behind a malicious service that allows the adversary to log back into the target is what? Persistence. Phase through network propagation. This phase follows a successful foothold being established on the target network. An attacker would seek to gain additional access and privileges to systems and data to fulfill their goals. The attacker would set up a base on one of the systems to act as their pivot point and use it to gather information about the internal network. Pivoting. Once the attacker has access to the system, they would use it as their staging site and a tunnel between their command operations and the victim's network. The system would also be used as the distribution point for all malware and backdoor at later stages. Discovery. The adversary would uncover information about the system and the network it is connected to. Within this stage, the knowledge base would be built from the active user accounts, the permissions granted, applications and software in use, web browser activity, files, directories, and network shares, and system configurations. Privilege escalation. Following their knowledge gathering, which is in the discovery phase, the adversary would try to gain more prominent permissions within the pivot system. They would leverage the information on the account present with vulnerabilities and misconfigurations found to elevate their access to one of the following superior levels: system or root, local administrator, a user account with admin-like access, a user account with specific access or functions. Execution. Recall when the adversary set up their attack infrastructure. Once the attacker has access to the system, they would use it as their staging site and a tunnel between their command operations and the victim's network. The system would also be used as the distribution point for all malware and backdoors at later stages and weaponized payloads. This is where they deploy their malicious code using the pivot system as their host. Remote Trojans, C2 scripts, malicious links, and scheduled tasks are deployed and created to facilitate a recurring presence on the system and uphold their persistence. Credential access. Working hand in hand with the privilege escalation stage, the adversary would attempt to steal account names and passwords through various methods, including keylogging and credential dumping. This makes them harder to detect during their attack, as they would be using legitimate credentials. And lateral movement. With her credentials and elevated privileges, the adversary would seek to move through the network and jump onto other targeted systems to achieve their primary objective. The stealthier the technique used, the better. As a SOC analyst, you pick up numerous alerts pointing to failed login attempts from an administrator account. What stage of the kill chain would an attacker be seeking to achieve? That would be privilege escalation. Mimikatz, a known attack tool, was detected running on the IT manager's computer. What is the mission of the tool? That is credential access. No? Is it lateral movement? This is weird. Credential dumping. Ah, there we go. Phase out. Action on objectives. Lots of money, lots of partying apparently. This phase wraps up the journey of an adversary's attack on an environment where they have critical asset access and can fulfill their attack goals. These goals are usually geared toward compromising the confidentiality, integrity, or availability triad. The tactics to be deployed by an attacker would include collection, exfiltration, impact, and objectives. Collection. After all the hunting for access and assets, the adversary will be seeking to gather all the valuable data of interest. This, in turn, compromises the confidentiality of the data and would lead to the next attack stage, exfiltration. The main target sources include drives, browsers, audio, video, and email. Exfiltration. To elevate their compromise, the adversary would seek to steal data which would be packaged using encryption measures and compression to avoid any detection. The C2 channel and tunnel deployed in the earlier phases will come in handy during this process. Impact. If the adversary seeks to compromise the integrity and availability of the data assets, they would manipulate, interrupt, and destroy these assets. The goal would be to disrupt business and operational processes and may involve removing account access, disk wipes, and data encryption such as ransomware, defacement, and denial of service attacks. Objectives. With all the power and access to the systems and network, the adversary would seek to achieve their strategic goal for the attack. For example, if the attack was financially motivated, they may seek to encrypt files and systems with ransomware and ask for a payment to release the data. In other instances, the attacker may seek to damage the reputation of the business, and they would release private and confidential information to the public. While monitoring the network as a SOC analyst, you realize that there is a spike in the network activity and all the traffic is outbound to an unknown IP address. What stage could describe this activity? That would be exfiltration. And I'm not going to spell that because that's going to be too hard. Personally identifiable information has been released to the public by an adversary, and your organization is facing scrutiny for the breach. What part of the CIA triad would be affected by this action? Confidentiality. Cool. Deploy the static site attached to the task. You will need to match the various actions of an attacker to the correct phase of the unified kill chain framework to reveal the flag. The attacker uses tools to gather information about a system. The attacker installs a malicious script to allow them remote access at a later date. That's persistence. The hacked machine is being controlled from the attacker's own server. That's command and control. The attacker uses the hacked machine to access other servers on the same network. Pivoting. The attacker steals a database and sells this to a third party. Action and objectives. No. Impact. No. Execution? No. Action and objectives? Hello? Ah, there we go. The flag came down below and I couldn't see it. Boom, baby. Conclusion. Congrats on making it through the unified kill chain room. Hopefully you understand the importance that frameworks such as the UKC play in identifying risks and potential mitigating attacks for reconstructing the various steps an attacker took. As mentioned in this room, the UKC is a modern extension of other frameworks such as Lockheed Martin's Cyber Kill Chain framework. If you're interested in learning more about frameworks in cybersecurity, we would highly recommend to you the other rooms in TryHackMe, Principles of Security, Pentest Fundamentals, and Cyber Kill Chain, which if you have joined me before, that's this video. here. As usual, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, share with a friend, and we will see you in the next one.